Hello, this is Cho of the Shiny Colors Discord. Welcome to another episode of the Shiny Review. Today we've got a couple cards to talk about, a new produced SSR for Kiriko and support SSR for Hinana. Keep in mind these are both limited, they are part of the Twilights Collection, which means they will be returning at a later date. Right now our projection is that it will be 4 months from now, so sometime in December, more than likely, and if not, maybe sometime a little bit earlier. Some people are thinking it may be tied to lives, but maybe it's safe to just assume every 4 months. We'll see. The cards are pretty good. They're not as good as Mono and Kaho are in kind of a general sense, but they have their very high strengths, naturally. I'm going to try to focus around these cards relatively being low-starred, just because the likelihood of you being able to 4-star both cards is very low unless you are willing to drop a lot of Feather Jewels at once, which can be very risky and maybe not wise going into the future. So I'll show everything, of course, but we'll kind of talk as if we're only maybe at like 1 copy, 2 copies. So we'll give or take there. If you don't really like that format and just want to hear the cards at full power, then let me know in the comments. So starting off, we have Kiriko. Once again, we have reached Twilight's Collection nearly 4 months after the first. There's been a lot of things learned just with this banner's release, such as Twilight designs not being unique and still tied to the respective unit designs. Now, Kiriko follows Mono's lead in being a pure stat unit, this time favoring Vocal. She is quite actually everything you'd come to expect with Antika, including a few new tricks. Notably, she continues the trend of plus appeal and gains Duet. This is not the first time Duet has appeared off of a Hokura card, but it is the realistic first time for Antika. The fascinating part about Kiriko is how much she does at every star level. Her initial appeal ends up being great for Collabofest, while her 1-star appeal hits AoE, generates memory gauge, and can lower judge interest. Lastly, her 4-star appeal instead hits AoE, adds additional damage based on lower attention, buffs your Vocal, and can duet randomly with Antika. All of her passives are frankly insane for Vocal Antika, and Kiriko marks a sharp reboot for the team, pitching Kiriko 4's playstyle to the wayside. Her roles are Center, Buffer, Attack All, Interest Manipulation because she can go up and down with her interest, and she's a memory gauge booster. I highly to very highly recommend pulling for Kiriko. If you're a fan of Vocal Antika, this card is a must-have. If you're just building a general Vocal team and you think you have room for her, it's not a bad choice, but just understand that she's not going to necessarily fit like a glove on every single Vocal team that may have a spot open. You might have to force the team a little bit, which can get tricky. Kiriko's initial skill is a Vocal 3.5 appeal that raises your Vocal by 50% for 3 turns. Her plus appeal, which requires the entire Antika lineup and the turn count to be earlier than 4, increases a judge's interest by 50% for 1 turn. Her 1-star appeal is a Vocal 4.0 to all judges that raises your memory gauge by 25%. The plus appeal, which again requires all of Antika and the turn count to be 3 or earlier, lowers the judge's interest by 70% for 1 turn. And remember, because this is an AoE attack, that applies to all judges. Her 4-star skill is a 3.0 Vocal appeal to all judges, that follows up with a Vocal 0.4 to 2.0 appeal that scales based on how low your attention is, and also raises your Vocal by 100% for 3 turns. The plus appeal, which requires the full Antika lineup and the turn count to be 2 or earlier, grants you a free duet randomly with Antika. Now, for the passives. Kiriko's 1-star passive is a Vocal 60% up and attention 50% down that requires the turn count to be 2 or earlier, which has a 30% chance to activate once. This also comes with a Vocal plus 150 uncap. Her 2-star passive is a Vocal 120% up with attention 50% down that requires just the full Antika lineup, and has a 30% chance to activate twice. This also gets a Vocal Dance Visual plus 100 uncap. Her 3-star unlock is a Vocal 150% passive that also lowers your attention by 50%. That requires the full Antika lineup and the turn count to be later than 3. This has a 20% chance to activate twice, and this also unlocks a Mental plus 200 uncap. Her 4-star unlock is the Rainbow passive, as well as a Vocal Dance Visual plus 100 uncap, and her memory appeal when maxed out is a Vocal 3.0 that links into a Vocal Maximum 5.0 that scales based on how low your attention is. Said Rainbow passive is a Vocal 200% up that requires one of the following: either Kiriko to be in your skill history, or the current turn count to be 5 or later. This has a 35% chance to activate twice, and you are limited to this passive once per turn. And just like Mono, she has a unique Twilight's Collection passive, which increases all members' appeal strength by 5%. Just like Mono, Kiriko retains the exact same Twilights Collection passive. My current guess is that everyone's first TC card will keep this, and it will most likely change by the second rotation, but that's a very long time from now. So maybe another way to look at it is that if we've already had our visual and vocal, we're going to have a dance TC that maybe keeps this passive, and then maybe the second time around we get to a stat, we'll have a different passive. Who knows? Now outside of this, Kiriko brings an incredibly large vocal passive that simply requires her to have done anything in the performance in order for it to become live. If you opt to use her as a center because you were unable to gain any extra copies, you can instead have the passive live on the turn you intend to memory appeal. Sort of a win-win in that sense. Now Twilight's Collection has not gotten any less expensive, so it's fair to consider that many may only have this Kiriko at 0 star or 1 star. While naturally Kiriko has a ton of strength hidden behind her limit breaks, what you also have is a reasonably competent center that still works well within the realm of Vocal Antica without being the focal point. It's only when you get those later upgrades that the dynamic shifts around, letting Kiriko do all the work. In comparison to Mono, Kiriko is not quite as splashable on the vocal teams as Mono was for visual. Lowering attention is actually kind of a detriment for a lot of teams currently, so while the passives are very strong, it can overall weaken your game plan if your intention is to get hit a lot to generate memory gauge, or maybe you want your health lower in order to utilize other passives. So Kiriko kind of pushes against that. It may be best to be wary of diving too deep into the banner if Vocal Antica doesn't inherently interest you. For the support recommendations, the MVP of course is the limited Sakuya we got earlier this year. Very strong vocal support that has basically everything that Kiriko would want. Now as for some other great vocal options, Murmur Maid as well as Kokoro Mine are very good choices within Vocal Antica, just for the pure vocal stats. The rest really do depend on whether you're building in Grad or Step, and what pairings you would prefer to use. Mei and Fuyuko are great in terms of synergy, as well as Madoka and Hinana. But if one has more investment than the other, then it might be worth switching to one of those other combinations. If you already have a high invested Fuyuko, for example, then considering Mei is probably better than if you have a very low investment Hinana and a maxed out Madoka. But if you have those options, feel free to mess around with them. Lots of players in grade 6 and 7 have been utilizing different combinations of these and are seeing great results. Honestly, this combination of masteries with all of these cards should make building a breeze. Now, for attention down, the only real choice here is the Kogane. And this Kogane, despite all of this, is still very popular on most builds. So just because she's down here by herself doesn't mean she's bad. Just consider her for the time being if you have one of those pieces that are potentially missing. She's great to pair with Kokoro Mine if you intend on using the Mitsumine appeal to drop your mental, so that way Kogane's passive, which requires you to be low health, will actually have a chance to activate. Since Kiriko is dropping your attention, being hit is a lot less likely, so manipulating your own health is probably the best way to go if you want to use that Kogane passive. No team build this time because right now Kiriko is kind of in a weird spot where Vocal Antica is just a mishmash of cards with either Kiriko as the center or Kiriko as the vocal unit. It doesn't really matter as long as you know what you're intending to do. If you're a center, you're just aiming for turn 5 with lowering your attention, which during this fest season is fine. And if you're going for her in the vocal position, then that means you've probably already gotten enough copies of her to really be invested. Now, as a center, I would say she's in the S plus to double S range. Kiriko more or less assumes the same situation Mono did. As it turns out, Mono ended up being the de facto center for a large majority of Illumine, so logic stands that Kiriko will work just as well. We've seen center Kiriko already in higher Great Fest level sweeps single-handedly, and her memory appeal is powerful given her circumstances. Until Antica find a comfortable alternative, which I have seen some builds utilizing Kogane and maybe even Sakuya, Kiriko may be here to stay as a center. As a unit, it's kind of weird. If you're not really investing too far into her, like if you're only going for maybe one copy, she's about average with most permanent SSRs that you put a little more investment into, so that's why she's kind of in that B+ range. The more copies you get, the more ridiculous she is, until the point where she's a double S unit who is single-handedly carrying fest teams just by her appealing, memory appealing, or double appealing into somebody else memory appealing. She does a lot, because all of her passives are stupidly strong and have easy activation conditions, and her appeals are crazy. So, again, the rating does depend heavily on how many copies you are willing to go for the card. It goes without saying that she is carrying Vocal Antika on her back when she's maxed out, but don't be surprised if she seems a little underwhelming if you don't have that many copies. Next up we have Hinana. Hinana is our first vocal support from Twilight's Collection, and just from her support masteries is very similar to Kaho before her. Aside from trading visual for vocal, she shares the same level of perfect mastery when maxed out, but notably has slightly worse masteries at lower levels, favoring her later uncaps much more. The straight upgrade is unit mastery SP being noticeably larger at level 60 to 65 than for Kaho. Hinana is not quite as easy to use as Kaho for vocal, and heavily depends on being at least 2-star if you're serious about using her. Her support skills are Idol's Bond, Rest Boost, and Stamina support. Keep in mind, as a Twilight's Collection support, her Idol's Bond actually goes higher than the average. Normally it's a plus 10, here it's a plus 15. Her Stamina support is also very good at 5 by level 65. Her unique support skills are Unit Mastery SP, reaching plus 12 at level 65. Vocal Mastery SP, reaching plus 12 at level 75, but notably only unlocking at level 60, meaning it's available right off the bat. Unit Mastery Vocal Limit Up, which goes all the way to plus 6 at level 70, but caps out at plus 2 if you only have her at 0-star. Vocal Mastery Stamina reaches a hefty plus 6 at level 80, but is only unlocked once you get her to 2 stars, where it's only a plus 3. And lastly, she has Perfect Mastery, which goes up to plus 8, but is only unlocked at plus 4 at level 75. Her support appeal does scale, starting at a Vocal 3.1 at level 60 that also grants a 5% vocal buff for 3 turns, and by level 80, it evolves to a Vocal 3.5 appeal that raises your vocal by 25% for 3 turns. Her TFD idea is Vocal, her insight token for Grad is Dance, and her proficiency and landing point is in SP. Hinana's 0-star passive is a Vocal 60% up and Attention 50% up that requires a turn count to be 3 or earlier, and has a 20% chance to activate twice. This also gets a Vocal plus 50 uncap. We'll just go ahead and say that you get a plus 50 Vocal on every level. Her 1-star unlock is a Vocal 3.5 appeal that raises your Vocal by 30% per successful dodge. This buff is active for 3 turns, and you can stack it up to 6 times. So you can have upwards of a Vocal 180% buff if you happen to dodge 3 attacks every turn for at least 2 turns. Her 2-star passive is a Vocal 120% up that also raises your attention by 30% and your evasion by 30% that just requires the full Knock Chill lineup, which has a 20% chance to activate twice. Her 3-star unlock is a Vocal 3.5 appeal that raises your vocal by 50% for 4 turns per successful dodge that lasts for 4 turns up to 6 times, so upwards of a 300% vocal buff, and now she gets a Vocal Mental plus 50 uncap. At 4 stars, she gets her Rainbow passive, as well as an additional Vocal Mental plus 50. Her Rainbow passive is a Vocal 200% up that requires you to have 1 or more active reaction buffs. This has a 30% chance to activate once and is limited to once per turn. Much like Kiriko, Hinana gets a B+ to SS. Many of the same flaws as Kaho apply to Hinana. Not having her at least a 1-star severely limits what she can accomplish, and unlike Kaho, this limits Hinana a fair bit more by comparison. Assuming you did not manage to max out Hinana, she's a decent SP generating support that provides a tiny bit of vocal support with her initial passive, which is very much true for the 1-copy and 2-copy situation. If you go beyond that, then things start looking a lot better. If you've already pulled the limited rookie Hinana in the past, it may be safer to invest into her if you were unable to secure any additional copies of Dived In. Naturally, she's stupidly strong once maxed out, but be very mindful of your feather jewels for later. Now, that will do it for the video today. Thank you so much, as always, for watching. If you like what you saw, make sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe if you haven't already, where you might get to check out our community posts for videos we may not get the chance to record. And I will see you in the next video for whatever banner may come next. Till next time, I've been Cho, thanks for watching, have a wonderful rest of your day.